It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Love those intros. I mean, I got the headphones up. I love the music. That's Bob Pace with the music, folks. And by the way, I've got another intro coming up for Podcast by George, some new music from Bob Pace. Really honored and delighted to have our friend Bob Pace doing some new music for the show. Bob Pace, if you don't know it, is one of Iowa's most respected, best known musicians over the past several decades. I mean, 40 years, maybe longer, going way back to the rock and roll days of the late 60s and early 70s. Is in the Iowa Blues Hall of Fame. He's in the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he does that music for Podcast by George. The voice you hear, as I've mentioned before, that's John Schaeffer. He's the son of Maxwell in the Morning, Maxwell Schaeffer, here in the Metro, and he's the TV5 sports guy and a friend of mine, a hockey teammate, and delighted to have his big booming voice announcing episodes of Podcast by George. Folks are joining us here on Facebook on the special edition. It's another PBG live line. And of course, it's dealing with medical issues and particularly with the pandemic. We've got flu shots coming up for folks. And we've got our good friend, Dr. Andrew Nish, coming back on the Podcast by George live line. Dr. Andrew Nish has spent almost 3 decades as an interventional radiologist by trade. His passion is to educate the public and healthcare workers about true health and well-being and how this can be achieved through lifestyle changes, including food and nutrition, stress management, sleep, exercise, purpose in life, and social relationships. He's especially fascinated with the mind-body connection and how our thoughts and beliefs directly influence our physical and mental health. And he's our sage. He's our guy here in this pandemic. Let's see if we can bring him in. There he is. Good morning, Dr. Nish.
Hey, good morning, George.
Thanks for joining us here. We've got folks coming on. I can see they're joining. And I want to encourage everybody, please, to share the broadcast on Facebook so others can see it. Also, go to YouTube when you get a chance and subscribe to us. I'll run some information on that during the show. Okay, Doc, I want to bring up this first article to kind of get us started here. It's just kind of a bouncing off point. Let's see if I can get this.
What are you going to surprise me with?
Yeah, to come up with. All right, so this is what's happening. West Des Moines votes to require masks in schools. Now, for folks around the country that may not realize it, we didn't have a mask mandate in this state. It was prevented by the governor. She's been overruled by the courts, at least a temporary injunction anyway, as I understand it. And this reads that West Des Moines joined metro school districts, Des Moines and Urbandale, when board members voted Thursday to require all students and staff to wear masks starting Monday. Members made the decision in a special meeting, which a flurry of districts have held in the last 4 days, after a federal judge Monday blocked Iowa's law preventing schools from making mask mandates. And that's kind of this house of mirrors that we live in. I talk about all the time. Yeah, we had a ruling that prevented schools from making mask mandates. According to data from the district from the first day of school through Monday, September 13th, the district has recorded 111 total positive COVID-19 cases among students and staff this year compared to just 38 this year. And so look at that photo. I mean, here's the bus driver. God love bus drivers. A shout out to those folks. I got a good friend that does this as well. There they are helping the kids on the school bus. But as you'll also notice, this is, I think that girl might be carrying a mask, but they're not wearing masks. And this was at the beginning, but that has changed a little bit. So let's get back with the doc here. So a couple of things, Doc. I would imagine that you're fully supportive of this and you're happy to see those masks go back on wherever it might be.
Yeah, this is an interesting issue. So let's really just look at what we know from a scientific standpoint. So what we know is that the current Delta variant, of which over 95% of infections are now the Delta variant, is much more highly transmissible than the wild type variant. So I don't know if any of your guests remember early in the pandemic, we were talking about this R0 number. And this R0 number is sort of the infectious rate. How if you have COVID, how many people are you going to transfer that to? And the R0 for the initial strain of COVID was 2 to 3, 2.5, let's call it. Well, let's jump forward to the Delta variant. And the R0 is felt to be anywhere between 5 and 8. So that means one person who's infectious will transmit it to between 5 and 8 people. That's 3 to 4 times the original virus. So, and then we also have to take into account that kids under 12 aren't vaccinated. And so these kids are going to school, they're interacting with one another. We're not doing 6-foot social distancing or anything like that. And they have the possibility of contacting the Delta virus, taking it home, and then spreading it to 5 to 8 other people. So the problem isn't necessarily with protecting, the single problem isn't protecting the kids, and we certainly want to do that. It's those kids then transmitting that virus when they come home to grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, who may or may not be in good health, who may or may not be immunocompromised. And so I think that we have to be cognizant of what mask wearing really means. It's to protect the kids. It's to also protect all the ancillary personnel at school. Many of these adults are not in good health. Many of these adults may be immunocompromised. And so mask wearing, we're in a high transmission time right now, not a low transmission time. Yeah. And when you look back at the data, our transmission rate here in the community is almost as great as it was in January of 2020. So COVID is not over. We're in the midst of another surge of COVID. And we need to, again, take simple public health measures to combat this virus. And mask wearing is one of them. And so I think every child who goes to school, every worker who's in school, everybody who interacts should be wearing masks.
Well, give us this perspective, because I have heard this and it's out there and it's going around, and if people believe it, even our illustrious governor that I mentioned, Kim Reynolds, mentioned it in a press conference just recently that Laura Bellin and I talked about on the podcast by George, if people haven't seen that. But it's this belief that some children are harmed by wearing masks in school, that they can develop some kind of facial acne or some kind of a blood disorder, and then even more shocking, that they can bring whatever they've gotten from wearing a mask home and transmit it to their parents. Now, I know you follow the science and the reporting very closely. Is there some very isolated incidents of something like this happening out there? What are they talking about?
I'm going to be honest. I have not seen that in the scientific literature. There, in my opinion, in my reading, there's no data to support it. It's hypothetical and theoretical. And as far as bringing stuff home with the mask, wear a disposable mask and throw it away, or wash your mask when you get home. I've heard this before, and it's been answered in the scientific community that, by wearing a mask, you then expose yourself to more viral particles because it's trapped in that mask. That's never been proven. It's not real. So we tend to manufacture hypotheticals to, support our opinion. And I think these are all hypotheticals. I mean, I've even heard that kids will develop PTSD because they're forced to wear masks. Kids are incredibly resilient, and kids, if you teach them properly and you help them understand why they need to wear a mask, most kids have no problem wearing a mask. Even 3 or 4-year-olds I've seen wear masks perfectly well. And when it becomes part of the community and everybody's, what do kids want to do? They want to fit in, right? So if it becomes part of the community, then everybody wants to wear a mask because they want to fit in. So I think these concerns of acne, there are way, way more causes in our environment that result in acne than wearing a mask. And one of them is our highly inflammatory diet. So let's get rid of the nonsense and let's work with the science. And the science tells us that mask wearing helps combat the transmission of COVID-19. It keeps people healthy, it keeps them out of the hospital, and it keeps them from dying. Nobody died from acne because they wore their mask. Let me tell you, I wore a mask for 10 to 12 hours a day for almost 30 years, and I have perfectly healthy skin. Nonsense.
Gotta say, I agree with you there, Doc. And of course, children are most influenced at 98% by their parents, obviously. And if you make this compulsory for the kids, they got to wear the mask. And you don't need to threaten them. You can make it fun. God, when I was a kid, we wore masks, for fun. I mean, cowboys and Indians, all those types of things. Tell kids they got to wear a mask. They have personalized little kitty masks with logos and stuff on them that the kids would like to wear. I mean, you can do that. And I guess Laura Bellin, again, to reference her from the most recent PBG that we did, she made an excellent point. If you're that concerned about your child's health, wearing a mask at school, then keep the kid home. You should probably avail yourself of virtual learning, online learning for that child if you think that they're going to be afflicted with some malady from wearing a mask or transmitting it to you. And that would allow all the other kids that want to go to school and wear a mask to be able to do that. But, this is where the needs of the many should be outweighing the needs of the few, to go back to Star Trek, I guess, although they probably lifted that somewhere. Well, I've got some comments coming in where the broadcast is, people are joining it. Here's a question, Doc. I want to get to these to make sure that everybody gets a chance to question. It says, I have been vaccinated and have no spleen. The plan is for me to get a booster at 6 months. Okay, we're going to talk about those boosters. The question is, should I wear a mask around my grandchildren, even though I've been vaccinated?
So that's a little bit nuanced in the fact that, is it an indoor and outdoor space? If it's an indoor space, absolutely you should be, particularly if your grandchildren are going to school and not wearing masks, or if your grandchildren are in daycare. If you're outside, it depends, again, how close a contact. So outside, even, because you've lost your spleen, you are immunocompromised, it would be recommended that you do wear a mask in all settings when you're interacting with anybody from the public or close interaction with family members who don't live in the same household.
I've got a friend that's missing a spleen. So I've heard this before, but just basically so that a dummy like me can get some of it. What's the spleen? What's it doing? Why is it so important when it comes to immunity?
Well, so the spleen is an immune organ, and the spleen is most important at what we call opsonizing, or sequestering what we call encapsulated bacteria organisms like staph pneumonia or gonorrhea and things. So that's where the spleen is most important. But it is a repository for white blood cells. Our white blood cells mature there. And so when somebody's had their spleen out, they're much more susceptible to certain bacterial infections. But it's also important that we recognize they've lost some immune function for other illnesses.
Well, as I mentioned, this referenced the boosters. So let me bring this up. I want to get to this next article here.
The boosters.
Yeah. And it used to be a good thing. Still is a good thing, potentially. Let's go to, there's that logo. That's our Caver logo. Okay, so here's this article in the USA Today. After hours of discussion, a federal advisory committee Friday recommended a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine 6 months after full vaccination for people age 65 and older, and those at high risk of severe COVID-19. Pfizer had asked to make the booster available to everyone age 16 and up. There isn't sufficient evidence, it reads, to show boosters for people under 65 are necessary, said members of the Food and Drug Administration's Vaccines and Related Biology Product Advisory Committee. Those at high risk would include healthcare workers, first responders, and people likely to be exposed to the virus at work, committee members said. Members said getting it right and waiting to follow the science were important factors. Now, the other part highlighted over here is the committee doesn't make the decision for the FDA, but the FDA almost always takes its recommendations to heart. Okay, Doc, I read that article and I'm thinking, well, okay, I get that, I guess, but I would say that just about all of us are at some risk of getting COVID infection at work. Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, with the high community transmission, sure, we're all at risk. We again, the vaccines are designed to prevent severe COVID infections, hospitalizations, and death, and they continue to do that. Um, so, yeah, this is and the science is not set on this. This is an evolving area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was an Israeli study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine on the 15th of September, and they looked at patients 60 and over, and they looked at one group who had a booster vaccine, Pfizer. They looked at the other group who didn't have the booster. And they did find that in people 60 and older, that the booster did provide added protection for those people. I think the real concern with the FDA, the advisory committee is, okay, we know that the booster can provide added protection in older people, but are there downsides to the booster? And that's the whole thing about vaccine efficacy. We want to make sure what we're doing is safe. And, in science, we've understood over decades of research that things that seem intuitive sometimes don't turn out that way. So we want to make sure that giving people boosters is not only efficacious, but is safe. Is it causing any other problems that we haven't been aware of? So I think that's one of the reasons the advisory committee weighed in and said, boosters aren't for everybody. We know that people who are older tend to not have as good of immune reaction. We know there's multiple states of immunocompromised, people who are undergoing chemotherapy, people who are taking specific drugs, don't have spleens, et cetera. So I think that's where, we're really weighing in on the side of safety here. I think that they'll continue to study the evolving science. They'll continue to study, are there any adverse reactions with the booster? The other thing that's been argued from an ethical standpoint, particularly by the World Health Organization, is, okay, wait a minute. United States, you have more vaccines than your country's willing to take. Why aren't you distributing that to the rest of the world to help us out? And I think that that's a real valid concern. We've got somewhere over 50% of our population vaccinated right now. We've got a significant proportion of our population who won't take the vaccine. Why should we stockpile it? Why should we not distribute that to the rest of the world who will willingly take this vaccine to help with this COVID transmission? So I personally struggle with that a lot. We're the United States, so we're the kings of the world, or so we think. And I think that there's a real ethical concern about, if we don't want to use it, fine. Let's not give everybody boosters. Let's distribute it to the rest of the world to help them.
Another comment on this topic from a viewer, and it's a good one. Is there reason to believe, is the science settled at this point as to the efficacy, as you call it, of these vaccines, that Pfizer perhaps doesn't work quite as well and therefore may need a booster, whereas like me, I got a Moderna, so I might not need a booster?
So number one, science is never settled, right? We're always learning. And I don't care if it's about heart attacks or cancer, science is never settled. So to think we have the absolute answer is not, in my opinion, correct. Science continues to evolve. Now, what we do know right now is the Moderna appears to hold up better as far as antibody levels as opposed to the Pfizer vaccine. So that's why we're talking about Pfizer and not Moderna. The thing that's a little bit bothersome is there's two different types of immunity. So we have antibodies, but then we also have cellular immunity. And nobody's really studying the cellular immunity. So this is the immunity where we develop cells who would recognize an infection, and therefore it's a different type of immunity than just antibodies that go right to this virus and disrupt its replication. So, the science is not settled. Our preliminary evaluation suggests that there is some waning antibody response to the Pfizer vaccine over time, and that the Moderna appears to hold up better. We don't have enough numbers for the J&J, so we can't even comment on the J&J. So again, this is going to be heavily studied over the next months and years, and we'll see. It'll evolve.
It is a work in progress, and we're learning
Mhm.
as we go along. Everything about, not everything, but a lot of this is novel, folks. It really is. I mean, that was a way of identifying it to begin with and continues to be true. Let me go ahead and see if
And
I
again,
can.
the answer we have to have, George, is number one, does it help? Does it prevent COVID infections and prevent people from hospitalization and death? But number two, as we give boosters, are these boosters safe? Or are they causing reactions that we didn't expect? And that's why I think that we have to be, the FDA is going to be careful on this.
All right.
What's the first adage of health and healthcare? Do no harm.
No harm.
So,
That's where you start. That's where you end. That's what it's all about. Okay,
but
let
the
me
other big thing we want to be
uh,
cognizant of too, George, and I preach this day in and day out, is we need to optimize our own health. So we need to optimize our health. We need to eat well, meaning lots of plant-based
well,
material. We
that's
need
the
to
ne-
get out and walk and move and exercise. We need to sleep well. We need to be able to manage our stress and social relationships so that those are giving us positives and not negatives. Okay, these are all incredibly important.
well,
And
that brings us right to the next slide. I mean, this is right in your wheelhouse. So let me, or slide as they call it. Let me bring this up and see if we can have a look here. Okay, this is something that I originally saw this morning in the Axios newsletter, and it's from the CDC. But this is the overall obesity map for the United States. Prevalence of self-reported obesity. Look at that and I go, oh my God, if it's self-reported, it might be a lot worse than this because, I'm not fat. Nobody's fat. Self-reported obesity among U.S. adults by state and territory. These estimates should not be compared to prevalence estimates before 2011. Well, there's your map, and there's the state of Iowa. There's kind of a bad island right in the middle of some surrounding states. Here's your color coding over here to the right to show you where obesity is the worst, and it's in these states that you see in the deep dark red. And here's the point that they're making in the newsletter. Again, this is from Axios, Jared Whalen, and he's citing the CDC chart. The number of states where adults with obesity make up at least 35% of the population significantly jumped from 2 years ago. Now, that's probably something to do with the pandemic as well, either mentally or physically. I was surprised some people are getting outdoors and exercising and eating right, but a lot of people apparently aren't. That's according to new CDC data. And Iowa is among the latest to join that list. Our obese population rose from 34% in 2019 to 36.5% in 2020. You look at that and think, well, that's not that big of a deal. But folks, that's, just since 2020, just 10 years ago, obesity in Iowa was at 29%, and we're at 36.5%. Why it matters? Obesity is linked to a number of health complications, ranging from heart disease to increased risk of COVID-19 hospitalizations. A 2016 report from Wellmark showed obesity contributes to the state's most costly conditions. And of course, they're concerned about cost first and foremost, obviously. But so there's that chart, very telling, Doc, but it leads to a question I really wanted to get into today, because we know obesity is not good for us, but what is it about COVID in particular that makes it more likely, I think, that you'll become infected, more likely that you'll become sickened, and more likely that you could even die from COVID simply from being obese?
Oh, George, how long do you have here?
Yeah.
Let's put it, simply. So, obesity leads to what I'm going to call metabolic dysregulation. And metabolic dysregulation means our insulin levels are too high. We have this milieu of underlying inflammatory molecules that are circulating throughout our body. Our immune system is suppressed. We know that our immune system is dysfunctional with metabolic dysfunction. And this all leads to this perfect storm. So we also know that when we become infected with COVID, this markedly upregulates our inflammatory system, our inflammatory cytokines. And much of the damage is felt that COVID causes is felt to be due to this inflammatory reaction. Well, if this inflammatory reaction is already cranked up because of obesity, our immune system is suppressed. Number one, we're more susceptible to the disease because our immune system is suppressed. Number two, we're more susceptible to the effects of the COVID infection cranking up our immune system and our inflammatory system and what we call these molecules called cytokines. And that leads to more organ dysfunction. It leads to more hospitalizations, and it leads to worse outcomes with higher death rates and more ICU stays.
How does it make you more likely to become infected? That part of it I don't understand. Or does it?
Well, our immune system just doesn't, it doesn't combat that initial inoculum as well. So, we don't have the ability to fight that off. So you're more likely to have, and you could have subclinical infections. You and I might have a subclinical infection. We might be exposed. We might actually have an infection, but we don't have clinical symptoms. People who have obesity are much more likely to actually have the symptoms.
And where does it rank as far as at-risk factors are concerned? I mean, I know smokers are always at risk for everything bad, basically.
I don't know rankings. It's either number one or number two.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and talking about at-risk factors, here's something that I wanted to get to, and our podcast by George viewers and listeners will know all about this one, and I wanted to talk about it before we ran out of time today. Ardith Keplinger down in Mount Ayr, Iowa. Her husband struck down by COVID. He's a former coach of mine from my school days, believe it or not. Go to podcastbygeorge.com and seek out that podcast and watch that, because she's got words of wisdom and words of warning here that everybody should heed, because it took away her husband. And here's what happened, Doc, and here's what I want you to talk about. I'm hearing about this a lot. Now, maybe it's because of my age demographic and the fact that we're the older folks are big family people. They want to get together with family. They're going to these family gatherings, and a lot of COVID is being transmitted in these things. And I suspect, although I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's because they have this need to get together with a large family group, number one. And then number two, when they do, they have this sense of familiarity, a sense of security, a sense of safeness, because they're around loved ones and family members, which simply you just can't do. I mean, COVID, as Ardith said in the podcast, COVID doesn't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah, so let's go to number one. Why are we so, we want to get back to family? Well, that's what we are. We are social tribal creatures, and we want to be with our tribe. And when we're not with our tribe, we feel lost and lonely. So there's absolutely every evolutionary instinct tells us to get back with our families. And so that's what we want to do. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. But unless your family lives in the same house and you know exactly where they've been, then it doesn't make any difference whether you're with family or a stranger, because your family has multiple interactions per day. So they have interactions at school, they have interactions with friends, they have interactions at the grocery store. And every one of those interactions is a potential source for acquiring COVID. And just because they're family does not mean that they're, protective of some reason for not giving you COVID virus. So that's where, we have this illusion, oh, they're family, they must be okay. The reality is they're no different than a stranger, because you don't know every interaction they've had. So how do we get together as families? Well, we can get together safely. Number one, I think it's really important, and if you're eligible, get vaccinated. Number two, if you are in an indoor space, so you're having a family dinner, it's best to mask unless you're eating. And that's true, that really is dependent on the transmission at the community level. So we're at high transmission right now, and therefore it's incumbent on us to wear masks when we're indoors with multiple people who are not part of the same household. If you really want to be safe, the best thing to do is have your gatherings outdoors. For those who are not vaccinated or who are immunocompromised, they should still be wearing masks. But have activities outdoors. It's a much safer environment than indoors. It's a beautiful time of year. It's fall. Our temperatures are cooler. It's a wonderful time to have outdoor interactions. But yeah, we can't, we have to treat family just as we would treat a stranger, because you don't know where the families who don't live in your household have been on any given day. And I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law, my wife's sister, she came down with COVID. She's only interacted with family for the most part. She thinks she probably got it from her grandson at daycare, but she doesn't know. So bam, where did I get COVID from? I haven't been with anybody else. Family. And, so I want to dispel this illusion that we're safe because they're family. Not necessarily at all.
Yeah. I don't want to be like W.C. Fields and diss on kids. I like kids as much as the next guy, but a lot of it does seem to be coming from children and young children, in particular, in these smaller, in these large family gatherings. But Doc, I guess it's not that the kids are more infectious or transmitting. It's because they're not vaccinated. Would that be true? Would that be your feeling?
Yeah, they're not vaccinated. They're going to school or daycare, and many of them aren't wearing masks. So, you remember the R0, the Delta variant, 5 to 8, not 2 to 3. So for every kid who gets infected, he may infect 5 to 8 people as he or she passes it on. So there's no blame here. We can't effectively vaccinate kids less than 12. That study is ongoing. I think we'll see some recommendations in the next 2 to 3 months. So we have to take other precautions. And those precautions are, if you're doing a family gathering, either do it outside, or you're going to just still need to wear masks inside, particularly with large numbers and young children.
And speaking of blame here, I wanted to get to this next comment, and we got to run with the show here pretty quickly. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that we're not fat shaming people here when we're talking about obesity. This commenter said the stress of fat phobia is more probably the cause of the inflammatory response that people are having from COVID. It says, I can feel the stress just listening to this. Please get a clue about check out the fat doctor. It says, well, again, we're not fat shaming folks here. I could be in better shape, folks. The doc's in excellent shape, but
it's not, and it really isn't. Whenever I talk about overweight or obesity, I never talk about weight. I talk about metabolic health, because you can be overweight and have perfectly normal metabolic health. And frankly, your risk of COVID is going to be just like a thin person.
Yeah, okay.
But the opposite is also true. You can be thin and be metabolically unhealthy, and you're at higher risk for COVID. So it's not about particularly your weight. It's about your metabolic health. That's what I care about as a physician. Now, how do I know by looking at someone they're metabolically healthy or unhealthy? I don't. I have to have some labs to help me with that. And, I want to go back to fat shaming, because we have this impression in our society that, we look down. People who are overweight or obese are discriminated against. There's no question about it. And that is absolutely wrong, because the mantra, that we started with in the 70s is, if you're fat, it's a personal responsibility, right? You eat too much and you can't get off the couch. It is absolutely not a personal responsibility. It is our environment that's causing this, and it's our hormones that's causing this. And it's not about willpower, okay? It's just like taking an alcoholic. An alcoholic, you say, well, you got to have better willpower. Nonsense. That's a disease, okay? Those people need help just like I would need help if I had a heart attack. The same with obesity. It's a disease, and that disease is compounded by our social stresses, by our food system and our addictive manufactured foods. And so it is a hormone problem, and you cannot combat your hormones without making drastic lifestyle changes. So we absolutely have to take the blame away from the person, and we need to support those people to change their health habits. It's not, I emphasize this, if you are overweight or obese and you've struggled, it's not your fault. Your hormones are telling you to store that energy because of this milieu of environmental signals that it's getting. It's getting these signals from our manufactured foods that we're eating. It's getting these signals from the stress we're all under in society. It's getting these signals because we don't sleep well. It's getting these signals because we don't move well. It's getting these signals because we're anxious, because of our social status or our social standing on Facebook, whatever it might be. And these are disrupting the normal hormone signaling, which keeps us fit and healthy.
Okay, as I mentioned, we're starting to run out of time. But last viewer comment or question here, Doc. This one reads: since getting a test kit for COVID-19 is $90, I didn't realize that the state closed its testing sites. Is there another way to get a test, particularly if you're symptomatic? This person puts in here. So I don't know, $90 to get a test kit. Is there any way to get tested free now? Do you know?
You know what? I'm going to plead ignorance. I don't
Yeah.
know the answer to that question. Since I'm not in the clinical world, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I do know this. The governor of the state of Iowa is sitting on a veritable pot of gold when it comes to COVID money. We need to get tested. It helps with all of this. We're under testing. We're under reporting COVID, obviously. It would help us know exactly what's going on. So why not use some of that money for testing? And maybe at the very least, in line with this question, would be let's provide free testing for people that are symptomatic. Anyway, at the
And
very
we're not
least.
doing contact tracing anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Much in the way of contact tracing. So, all the public health measures that we put into place early in this pandemic, we've sort of abandoned because we have this idea that it's over. Well, if you look at transmission rates and you look at hospitalizations, it isn't over. I mean, we're sitting at 64 in the hospital right now, and we were down as low as 6 a few months ago.
Wow. Well, our stream's starting to break up a little bit, so this is a good stopping point. I'm glad that it lasted as long as it did. I don't know why the internet does what it does, but folks, you've been listening and watching and getting your questions answered by Dr. Andrew Nish. He's the podcast by George medical expert. We want to make sure that we thank him for coming on the show, and thanks for all the great comments and questions, because that really does make it much more enjoyable to watch and makes it a little easier on me as well. Doc, thanks for coming on this podcast by George Live Line.
Thanks for having me, George, and thanks for letting me talk about how we can become more healthier and get through this COVID. Thank you.
Yeah, and we will revisit this. We'll come back around. He's good enough to come on with us when we need it. And it's been just about every week or two regularly here as we move through this pandemic. My God, going on 1.5 years, going to be 2 years here pretty soon. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.